All right, so let's go over UFC 319. That was a bit of a weird one. The highlight of the night for sure was the back-to-back spinning back fists, spinning back elbows on the main card by Carlos Prates and Leron Murphy. You know, those were two fights that looked like they were shaping up to be good scraps between Neal and Prates and Pico and Murphy, but both of them ended in the first round with those spinning back elbows. I underestimated Leron Murphy for sure. I called him a decision merchant, and he definitely proved me wrong. I really don't think Bellator fighters keep putting on these bad showings in their first shows in the UFC, like Aaron Pico just did there. But it wasn't the worst looking performance from Aaron Pico before he got completely slapped. I know that's kind of a stupid thing to say, but it is what it is. Aaron Pico didn't give a bad account of himself. It was just a very action packed fight that was likely to end in knockout, and it did. Same deal with Jeff Neal and Carlos Prates. Where Carlos Prates is specifically a very impressive fighter. I think he might have impressed people the most out of any of the fighters on the main card. Michael Venom Page definitely took care of Jared Cannonier. That was a pretty easy win there for Michael Venom Page. If you want to talk about Bellator fighters who made themselves look good in the UFC, Michael Venom Page most certainly has made himself look good recently. Tim Elliott with a very surprising win over Kai Asakura. One of a couple upsets on this card that I, of course, got wrong. I said that Tim Elliott's wonkiness wasn't going to be enough, but Tim Elliott completely out-wonked Kai Asakura. He absolutely used that wonkiness to his advantage, and Kai Asakura really didn't have very many answers. He obviously looked better on the feet, but Tim Elliott was absolutely dominant on the ground. I kind of couldn't believe just how much control he was able to assert over Kai Asakura. Kai Asakura looked like a fish out of water there in the second round, and Elliott eventually ended up getting the choke. I was right about Oleksiejczuk versus Meerschaert. I was right about Goodinez versus Andrade. Goodinez controlled the grappling. Andrade had some good stuff in the third round, and it would have been nice to see her do a little bit more on the feet in the first two rounds, but she really only found it on the feet in the third round, and it wasn't enough. She ended up losing that 29-28 decision to Goodinez. And Oleksiejczuk knocked out Meerschaert like I said he would. Meerschaert was going to have to take that fight to the ground because obviously with those 20 losses, Meerschaert has shown throughout his career to not be a great defensive fighter on the feet. And Oleksiejczuk is such a great striker that was kind of an inevitable knockout if Meerschaert didn't get the fight to the ground and dominate, which he didn't. So Ole was able to pretty easily get a KO. This is the fight that I got the most wrong here. I said that Alex Hernandez wasn't capable of knocking out Chase Hooper, and so Alexander Hernandez then proceeds to knock out Chase Hooper. And, I guess in my defense, he didn't sleep him. He didn't knock Chase Hooper out cold, and I still think Chase Hooper has a great career ahead of him. I think he's a very special fighter, especially at the lightweight division. Very big for lightweight. He's probably got to move up in him at some point in his career, but Chase Hooper's still a great grappler and maybe even a better striker, but Hernandez found that big shot, that big counter shot that's always a risk in any combat sport, that big counter punch over the top, especially in MMA with the lighter gloves. It just knocked Chase Hooper down. Hernandez got the finish right there at the end of the round. Only 2 seconds left to the end of the round, but Hooper wasn't able to defend himself from the ground, and the ref put a stop to it. So, I think it's a good example of a fight, a certain fight meaning a lot more to one fighter than the other. Like I said, this Goodinez Andrade fight, I said the fight means a lot more to Goodinez, and that was a big part of why I picked her as the winner. Well, in this fight, Hernandez, the fight means a lot more to Hernandez than it does to Hooper. And that much is obvious in the fact that Hooper is still going to be a pretty highly touted prospect even after this loss. I don't know how big of a drawback this actually is to Chase Hooper's career. He's just one good result from having a pretty high stock still in the lightweight division. And this really was a fight that I think prevents Alex Hernandez from dropping off of people's radar. I think a lot of people saw this fight and just thought that Alex Hernandez was basically getting put on the chopping block for Chase Hooper, and he knocks him out in the first round and reestablishes himself as a factor in the lightweight division. So that's a huge win for Alex Hernandez, and I definitely underestimated him. Klose versus Edson Barboza was as weird of a fight as I thought it would be. I think this is the last fight here on the undercard I'm going to talk about before we talk about the main event. But Klose versus Barboza, it had the potential to be a boring fight, and it was a boring fight in large parts. Barboza really had no answer for the offense of Klose, though, and that's why Klose ended up winning. Klose was really able, especially in the third round. The commentators were saying, I think early in the third round, or maybe it was the second round, but that Barboza just could not stop Klose's right hand. Klose could just throw that right hand out there and hit Barboza basically at will. So this is basically an example of a fighter like Jakar Klose who, may end up being a bit of a glass cannon, but at least he's a cannon. At least he's got the offense. And Barboza was trying to keep the fight slow, dictate the tempo, and it just didn't work. He didn't have the defense to negate Klose's offense. So it was a bit of a wonky fight, a bit of a weird fight, but one that Jakar Klose definitely won. And now let's talk about the main event. And, I'm not trying to take anything away from Khamzat Chimaev. I'm glad that my prediction was correct, I guess, but I know this is harsh, but this was one of the worst main events that I've ever seen, especially relative to the expectation. I mean, people expected this fight to be all sorts of action. I think that, weirdly, there were very few people predicting this kind of performance when we've seen this kind of thing time and time again in championship fights in the UFC, and ultimately it just was what it was. DDP had no answer to that aggressive wrestling style of Khamzat Chimaev, and I mean, 529 total strikes to 45. The way that Khamzat was just literally punching DDP in the side of the temple for the entire first round was just incredibly goofy, but it got him a 10-8 on the scorecards. I mean, you guys saw it. If you didn't, that's actually a good thing. All Khamzat would do was come out, tackle DDP to the ground, and wrestle him for the entire round. With about a minute 15 left in each round, the ref would stand them up. And I honestly don't really understand that. Like, Khamzat is just going to control the entire 25 minutes. It's going to be just like Khabib versus Conor, but without the finish. I mean, we've seen this before. And that's really the thing that frustrated me, is that Khamzat didn't really even look for the finish. Now, this is the largest opponent I imagine Khamzat's ever faced, especially at the championship level. And I guess it was just a matter of Dricuss having those long limbs. Dricuss is a good grappler too, a good wrestler, a good defensive wrestler, clearly to not get submitted by Khamzat, but it really ultimately just seemed to be about those long limbs of DDP that Khamzat couldn't really get a hold of any of them. Just had trouble submitting the larger man in this fight, or it could just be that he wanted to play it safe. He didn't want to put himself in any danger. He didn't want to give DDP a chance to switch him up and put any submissions on him, because I mean, DDP did manage to get a submission attempt in the 5th round, which, I'm going to be honest, I mean, a lot of what Khamzat did was impressive. It's obviously, we knew Khamzat was capable of that kind of performance, though. DDP really impressed me by being able to actually show something there in that 5th round, to not get completely drained by Khamzat just swallowing him alive, basically, for the entire fight. Managing to come back after 21 minutes of basically getting wrestled and managed to actually try to get on top and put a choke in. And that was, it's what Joe Rogan said. That was his one opportunity of the fight, and he didn't take it. And, DDP, it seemed like he said something at the end of the fight to Khamzat to the effect of, like, you should have stood up more. You should have given me a bit more of a chance. And I think there needs to be more of a culture of that in MMA, is seeing this. If you have the ability to completely dominate somebody on the ground, like, good for you, bro. That's cool. Just for the sake of the entertainment, for the sake of the fact that this is a show, that people paid money to watch this, that this is a pay-per-view, people paid hundreds of dollars for tickets to get into the building, traveled from all over the world. It's just not entertaining to watch, and you know what I mean, because you guys all had to watch it. It's hurting MMA, even if it is true to the spirit of the sport. It's hurting the sport having to watch fights like that, because I don't blame anybody if they just turned that off halfway through. But ultimately, it's still impressive. There's no answer for it, and I wonder if, similar to Khabib, how many fights Khamzat's even gonna have in the UFC. He's kind of almost already made his statement. There's going to be those people forever talking about how dominant Khamzat Chimaev was and how nobody could stand up to him, because Dricuss Du Plessis is one of the better middleweights of all time. He could move up to light heavyweight and potentially win that belt. He'd probably have trouble with Magomed Ankalaev, but he'd still be a great light heavyweight, so he can move up in weight. And he showed with that last round that he still has the heart of a champion. He still has those instincts. He just seemed a little less disheartened than some fighters we've seen get wrestled in a similar way to the way that DDP did in this fight. When guys are just getting that energy drained and sat on top of for 20 minutes, DDP actually did a good job of responding to that relative to how other fighters have responded. And to a certain point, it's almost like in boxing when a guy is just getting their ass whooped for 12 rounds, and you just kind of got to give them some respect that they even made it to the final bell. So I'm still a DDP fan. I might even be a little less of a Khamzat fan than I was before, and a little bit more of a DDP fan than I was before, weirdly, which I didn't expect. But I wanted to see more happen on the feet in this fight. I can't lie, and I think to a certain extent Khamzat took the easy way out, even though you obviously have to have that absurd skill level and the instinct that Khamzat does in order to exercise that. So those are my thoughts on UFC 319 and on the main event. Let me know what you guys think about this card. Were you disappointed in the main event as well? What do you guys think about Leron Murphy? What do you guys think about Carlos Prates? Are there any other fighters on this card who really stuck out to you? And do you guys agree with me that maybe despite this bad performance, that DDP still has a really bright future ahead of him and could maybe even still have a legendary status as a fighter one day? Because in my opinion, I think Khamzat is capable of doing that to just about anybody. So